Thousands of years ago, in the land between two rivers, scribes pressed strange symbols into wet clay messages meant to last forever. Today, those same symbols stare back at us like riddles without answers. What were they trying to tell us? Why did they bury these words in the ruins of forgotten temples? From curses that may have doomed entire cities to prophecies so precise they send chills down your spine. Ancient Mesopotamia left behind 25 cryptic inscriptions that defy easy explanation. This was the birthplace of civilization, where writing itself was invented, where kings claimed to speak with gods, and yet so much of what they wrote remains shrouded in mystery. These aren't just old words, they're time capsules from a world that shaped ours, whispering secrets we're still struggling to hear. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel these ancient puzzles one by one. Some might reveal startling truths about human history. Others, they'll leave you with more questions than answers. But one thing's certain, by the end, you'll never look at a clay tablet the same way again. Now, let's turn our attention to the very first of these ancient puzzles, the Enuma Anu Enlil Tablet. Unearthed from the ruins of Nineveh in the 19th century, this clay tablet isn't just a relic, it's a window into how the Mesopotamians saw the cosmos. Imagine a world where every eclipse, every shooting star wasn't just a celestial event but a message from the gods. That's exactly what this text claims. It's a sprawling collection of omens, meticulously linking astronomical phenomena to earthly events. A red halo around the moon that meant war was coming. Jupiter rising in a certain constellation, a sign of bountiful harvests or impending disaster, depending on the details. What makes this tablet so fascinating isn't just its predictions, but how it straddles the line between science and superstition. The scribes who wrote it were keen observers of the night sky, tracking planetary movements with surprising accuracy. Yet they believed these patterns held divine warnings. Modern scholars still argue over how much of it was genuine astronomy and how much was ritual divination. Some of the omens are eerily specific, like one that describes a solar eclipse so precisely. Historians have matched it to an actual event in the 7th century BC. Others are frustratingly vague, open to endless interpretation. And here's where things get even more intriguing. The tablet doesn't just predict events, it suggests ways to avoid catastrophe. Rituals, prayers, even the sacrifice of a white sheep could supposedly ward off the worst of the omens. Was this early science, early religion, or a mix of both? That debate still rages today. What's undeniable is that the Enuma Anu Enlil Tablet shows us a civilization deeply connected to the skies, searching for meaning in the stars, just like we do thousands of years later. Moving from the celestial omens of the Enuma Anu Enlil Tablet, we now step into the world of sacred architecture with the Gudea Cylinders. These two massive clay cylinders, inscribed over 4,000 years ago, tell the story of a ruler named Gudea and his divine mission to build a temple for the god Ningersu. But this isn't just a straightforward construction manual, it's a poetic puzzle filled with metaphors and cryptic commands that still leave historians scratching their heads. The cylinders describe the temple's design in vivid, almost dreamlike language. Walls are said to rise like the heavens, and gates are compared to bulls roaring at the dawn. These aren't just artistic flourishes, they're clues to how the Mesopotamians saw their sacred spaces as reflections of the cosmos. But here's where it gets mysterious. The text includes bizarre instructions like mixing dust from a pure place into the bricks or using wood from a tree that has never known the axe. Were these literal requirements or symbolic gestures? Scholars can't agree. Even more puzzling are the rituals tied to the temple's construction. The cylinders mention ceremonies where Gudea is visited by gods in dreams, giving him cryptic messages about the temple's layout. One passage describes a divine measuring rod that shines like the sun, but no one knows if this was a real tool or a metaphor for sacred geometry. And then there's the question of the temple's true purpose. Was it just a place of worship, or did it serve some hidden function tied to the god's demands? The Gudea Cylinders don't just give us a blueprint, they offer a glimpse into a world where building a temple was as much about pleasing the gods as it was about stacking bricks. And with so many of their phrases open to interpretation, these ancient texts remind us that some mysteries are built to last. Now, let's turn our attention from sacred architecture to the realm of justice with the Ur-Nammu Law Code. This ancient legal text, carved into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, is one of the oldest known sets of laws, predating even the famous Code of Hammurabi by centuries. But unlike Hammurabi's clear-cut eye for an eye approach, Ur-Nammu's laws are shrouded in ambiguity, leaving historians to piece together their true meaning from fragments and cryptic phrases. The code opens with a striking declaration. King Ur-Nammu was chosen by the gods to establish equity in the land, yet the laws themselves often lack specifics. For instance, one passage states that if a man cuts off the foot of another man, he must pay 10 shekels of silver, but the text doesn't explain how this punishment was determined or whether it applied equally across social classes. Compare this to Hammurabi's code, where punishments are meticulously detailed down to the exact weight of silver for different offenses. The contrast raises questions. Was Ur-Nammu's code meant to be flexible, or are we missing key pieces of the puzzle? Even more perplexing are the references to divine judgment. Several laws end with phrases like, "The god of the city shall decide," without explaining how this divine intervention would work in practice. Did priests interpret omens? Were there trials by ordeal, like the river test mentioned in later Mesopotamian texts? The vagueness has led to fierce debates. Some scholars argue these phrases were symbolic, reinforcing the king's authority as the god's representative. Others believe they point to lost rituals where deities literally spoke through signs or dreams. What makes the Ur-Nammu Code especially fascinating is its tone. Unlike Hammurabi's stern warnings, Ur-Nammu's laws often read like attempts at fairness: fines instead of mutilation, compensation over retaliation. But with so much of the text damaged or unclear, we're left wondering, was this a gentler justice system, or are we misreading the gaps? One thing's certain, these ancient laws remind us that even in the distant past, the line between divine will and human judgment was anything but straightforward. As we move forward, another set of inscriptions will take us deeper into Mesopotamia's spiritual world, where gods shaped humanity in ways that still baffle us today. Leaving behind the uncertainties of ancient justice, we step into the realm of divine creation with two of Mesopotamia's most enigmatic texts, the Eridu Genesis and the Kesh Temple Hymn. These early myths offer glimpses into how the Sumerians envisioned the origins of humanity, but like so many ancient inscriptions, they're riddled with gaps and contradictions that keep scholars guessing. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest surviving creation stories, begins with a world of water, a cosmic ocean where gods, not humans, were the first inhabitants. It describes how the deities labored to shape the earth, only to rebel against their toil, leading to the creation of humans as a substitute workforce. But here's where things get murky. Large sections of the text are missing, leaving us to wonder, how exactly did the gods fashion humans? Was it from clay, as later Babylonian myths suggest, or something else entirely? Even more puzzling are the abrupt repetitions, phrases that reappear verbatim, as if the scribe lost their place or copied an older, damaged source. Now contrast this with the Kesh Temple Hymn, a lavish ode to the goddess Ninhursag and her sacred city. While not a creation myth in the traditional sense, it drops tantalizing hints about humanity's purpose. The hymn celebrates the temple as a bridge between gods and mortals, calling it the binding cord of heaven and earth. Yet it never explains how humans fit into this divine architecture. Stranger still are the sudden shifts in tone, one moment praising Ninhursag's benevolence, the next warning of her wrath, without clear transitions. Some scholars argue these jumps reflect ritual performances where priests acted out different roles. Others suspect deliberate omissions, perhaps secrets reserved for initiates. What binds these two texts together is their shared ambiguity. Both describe gods shaping the world, yet neither gives a complete picture. The Eridu Genesis skips over key details, while the Kesh hymn drowns them in poetic metaphor. And then there's the eerie overlap. Both texts mention a great flood. But while the Eridu Genesis treats it as a divine reset, the Kesh hymn barely acknowledges it. Was this a later addition or evidence of a widespread myth? The real mystery lies in what these gaps conceal. Were the missing sections destroyed, or were they never written down passed orally instead? Either way, these fragments remind us that Mesopotamia's spiritual world was as complex as its legal codes, with just as much left to interpretation. Next, we'll encounter a text where divine anger takes center stage, a curse so vivid it seems to echo through the ruins of a fallen empire. Now, let's turn our attention to a text where divine fury isn't just hinted at, it's unleashed with terrifying precision. The Curse of Agade stands as one of Mesopotamia's most haunting inscriptions, a poetic lament that seems to predict the downfall of the mighty Akkadian Empire with uncanny accuracy. Written centuries after the city of Akkad had already crumbled, this text claims to recount the wrath of the gods, but its vivid descriptions leave scholars questioning whether it's a historical record or a supernatural warning. The curse begins with a shocking act of sacrilege. King Naram-Sin, the empire's proud ruler, allegedly defies the gods by plundering the temple of Enlil, the chief deity. In response, Enlil summons a host of divine punishments so specific they read like a checklist of disasters. Famine strikes first, with the text describing mothers abandoning their starving children in the streets. Then come the barbarian invaders, descending like locusts to sack the city. But the eeriest detail, the gods themselves are said to abandon Akkad, leaving its gates open and its walls defenseless, a metaphor that chillingly aligns with archaeological evidence of the city's sudden collapse. Digging into those ruins, modern researchers have found layers of ash and hastily buried bodies, suggesting a violent end. Even more striking are the records of crop failures and climate shifts around the same period, mirroring the curse's descriptions of withered fields and dried-up rivers. Was the text's author tapping into real events, or did the curse somehow shape the city's fate? Some scholars argue the curse was propaganda, crafted by later rulers to justify Akkad's fall. Others point to its ritualistic language, suggesting it might have been recited to ward off similar disasters. What makes the Curse of Agade truly unsettling is its lingering ambiguity. The text blames human arrogance for divine retribution, yet it never clarifies whether Naram-Sin's sacrilege was historical or symbolic. And while it paints Akkad's fall as inevitable, the archaeological record hints at a slower decline, raising the question: did the curse inspire the story, or did the story inspire the curse? As we move forward, prepare to encounter a legend where riddles aren't just written, they're woven into the very birth of an empire. Shifting from curses to legends, we arrive at one of Mesopotamia's most enigmatic tales, the origin story of Sargon of Akkad. Unlike the doom-laden prophecies of the Curse of Agade, this inscription spins a narrative of miraculous survival and destiny, wrapped in layers of political intrigue. Sargon's legend claims he was born in secret, placed in a reed basket, and set adrift on the Euphrates River, a story that might sound familiar as it echoes in later myths like Moses' infancy tale. But here's where it gets cryptic. The text never names Sargon's father, calling him a changeling or plant of the gods, leaving historians to wonder, was this a divine claim or a cover for humble origins? The riddles deepen with Sargon's rise to power. The inscription describes him as a cupbearer who overthrew his king, yet it's vague about how he won the gods' favor. Some lines suggest he was chosen by the goddess Ishtar, while others imply he seized power through cunning. This ambiguity wasn't accidental. Later rulers, like the Assyrian kings, rewrote Sargon's story to suit their own agendas, adding divine dreams or omens to justify their reigns. One version even claims Sargon's basket was guided by eagles, a detail absent in earlier texts. What makes the Sargon legend so fascinating isn't just its puzzles, but its purpose. Scholars argue it was less a biography and more a tool, a way to legitimize rulers by tying them to a heroic past, the gaps in the story, their invitations. For ancient audiences, they allowed each generation to reshape Sargon's myth to fit new political realities. For us, they're a reminder that in Mesopotamia, even the simplest tales could hide the sharpest blades of propaganda. Now, as we turn the page, prepare to encounter an object where measurement meets mystery, a tool that might hold cosmic secrets in its markings. Moving from legendary rulers to the precision of ancient tools, let's examine the Nippur Cubit, a deceptively simple object with layers of mystery etched into its surface. This slender rod, discovered in the sacred city of Nippur, wasn't just a tool for builders. Its engravings suggest it was a bridge between the earthly and the divine, with markings that align to celestial ratios. The cubit itself was a standard unit of measurement, roughly the length of a forearm, used across Mesopotamia for constructing temples and cities. But the Nippur Cubit goes further. Its divisions correspond to mathematical proportions found in the orbits of planets, leading some scholars to believe it encoded advanced astronomical knowledge. The question is, was this intentional? Did Mesopotamian architects understand cosmic scales, or were these ratios coincidental, a byproduct of practical geometry? One theory points to the cubit's link to the ziggurat of Nippur, a towering structure believed to mirror the heavens. The measurements of its steps and terraces match the cubit's divisions, hinting at a sacred blueprint. Yet critics argue that without explicit written evidence, we can't assume intentionality. The debate hinges on a single line in a fragmented tablet that mentions the measure of Anu, the sky god. Could this refer to the cubit's cosmic design? What's undeniable is the cubit's precision. Its ratios reappear in later Babylonian astronomy, suggesting a lasting influence. Whether it held hidden knowledge or simply inspired it, the Nippur Cubit reminds us that in Mesopotamia, even the tools of laborers might whisper secrets of the stars. Now, as we step into the realm of prophecy, prepare to unravel texts where politics and animal symbolism collide in veiled warnings. Now, let's turn our attention to the shadowy world of Mesopotamian prophecies, where politics and symbolism intertwine in ways that still baffle historians. The Uruk prophecy and the Marduk prophecy are two texts that seem straightforward at first glance predictions about kings and kingdoms, but peel back the layers and you'll find a maze of animal metaphors and coded messages. These prophecies don't name kings directly. Instead, they describe rulers as animals, lions, bulls, even serpents, each representing different traits or fates. The Uruk prophecy, for example, speaks of a lion with a broken claw who brings chaos, while the Marduk prophecy warns of a bull who tramples his own people. The problem: scholars can't agree on which real-life rulers these animals symbolize. Some argue the lion refers to a specific king of Ur known for his military failures, while others insist it's a metaphor for a later Babylonian ruler. The confusion deepens when you consider how these texts were used. They weren't just predictions, they were political tools. A king might commission a prophecy to legitimize his rule or undermine a rival, twisting the animal symbolism to fit his narrative. The Marduk prophecy, in particular, is suspiciously flattering to the city of Babylon, leading some to suspect it was propaganda dressed up as divine insight. Then there's the question of timing. Both prophecies describe cycles of rise and fall, with kingdoms collapsing and new ones emerging. But are they recounting past events or predicting future ones? The line between history and prophecy blurs here, with some scholars suggesting these texts were retroactive, written after the fact to make sense of political upheavals. What's undeniable is their enduring intrigue. Whether these prophecies were divine visions, clever spin, or a bit of both, they reveal how Mesopotamians saw their world, a place where rulers could be beasts and the future was always written in riddles. Next, we'll confront a text where curses aren't just words, they're weapons, wielded with chilling precision against an entire city. But now, let's step into the realm of raw power where words weren't just spoken but hurled like weapons. The Cursing of Akkad isn't your typical ancient text. It's a symphony of vengeance, a meticulously crafted list of poetic imprecations designed to dismantle an entire city's fate. What makes these curses so unsettling is their terrifying precision. They don't just wish misfortune upon Akkad's enemies, they paint it in vivid, almost cinematic detail. Rivers are commanded to run backward, fields to sprout thorns instead of grain, and mothers to forget their own children's names. One line even demands that the city's gates scream like a woman in labor, a haunting metaphor for unbearable suffering. But here's the twist. These weren't just angry outbursts. Scholars believe the curses had a ritual purpose. The text was likely recited during ceremonies, perhaps by priests, to enact a kind of supernatural warfare. Every word was a spell, every metaphor a binding chain. The specificity suggests they were tailored to target Akkad's vulnerabilities, its agriculture, its trade routes, even the loyalty of its people. And the timing is suspicious. The Cursing of Akkad appears right as historical records show the city's dramatic collapse. Coincidence? Maybe, but some archaeologists point to eerie parallels, droughts, rebellions, and abandoned temples that mirror the curse's predictions. Was this text a prophecy fulfilled or a weapon that actually worked? Either way, it reveals a mindset where language held tangible power. To the Mesopotamians, curses weren't just words, they were arrows loosed into the dark, and Akkad's enemies aimed to kill. Next, we'll unravel a law code where justice wasn't decided by judges but by a river. Now, let's wade into the murky waters of justice, Mesopotamian style. The Lipit Ishtar Law Code might not have the dramatic flair of curses, but its ambiguity is just as fascinating. This ancient legal text, carved into clay centuries before Hammurabi's famous code, deals with property disputes, loans, and even marital issues. But what stands out are the puzzling phrases that leave modern scholars scratching their heads. Take the line, "The river knows the truth." At first glance, it sounds poetic, almost mystical. But dig deeper, and you'll find a possible reference to trial by ordeal, a practice where guilt or innocence was decided by divine intervention. Imagine a suspect being thrown into the Euphrates. If the river accepted them, meaning they drowned, they were guilty. If they survived, the gods had declared them innocent. It's a stark reminder of how justice intertwined with the supernatural in Mesopotamia. Other laws are equally cryptic. One clause states that if a man's borrowed ox dies by the will of a god, he doesn't owe repayment. But how do you prove divine intervention? The code doesn't say, leaving room for interpretation or manipulation. Another law vaguely mentions the word of the street as evidence, blurring the line between rumor and testimony. What makes Lipit Ishtar's code so intriguing is its blend of practicality and mystery. Unlike Hammurabi's eye for an eye clarity, these laws often feel like riddles. Were they deliberately open-ended to allow flexibility, or did their original meaning get lost over time? Either way, they reveal a legal system where truth wasn't always black and white. Sometimes it flowed as unpredictably as the rivers themselves. Next, we'll confront a king list where rulers allegedly lived for thousands of years. How? That's a mystery even time struggles to explain. Now, let's turn our attention to a record that defies time itself, the Sumerian king list. This ancient text doesn't just list rulers, it shatters our understanding of history with kings who supposedly reigned for tens of thousands of years. But the real mystery kicks in with the Great Flood, a cataclysmic event that divides the list into two starkly different eras. Before the flood, the king's reigns stretch into the absurd. Ululim, the first king, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalga, lasted 36,000. These numbers aren't typos, they're deliberate, echoing a time when myth and history blurred. Some scholars argue these exaggerated reigns symbolize the gods' direct influence, while others suspect their political tools, linking later dynasties to divine legitimacy. Then comes the flood. The list describes it abruptly. The flood swept over. After this disaster, something changes. Post-flood kings rule for more reasonable periods, centuries instead of millennia. But why the dramatic shift? One theory suggests the flood marked a reset, a transition from mythical god kings to human rulers. Another ties it to later flood myths like Noah's Ark or the Epic of Gilgamesh, hinting at a shared cultural memory of a real catastrophe. What's fascinating is how the king list mirrors other Mesopotamian flood stories. The survivor, Ziusudra, appears here too, a Noah-like figure granted eternal life. This overlap raises questions. Was the flood a historical event or a symbolic clean slate? And why did scribes feel the need to bridge these two worlds with such extreme numbers? The Sumerian king list doesn't just record history, it warps it, leaving us to untangle where fact ends and legend begins. Next, we'll examine a hymn where healing and botany collide in ways that still puzzle researchers today. Now, let's step into the world of ancient medicine where healing and mystery intertwine in the Gula hymn of Bulutsa Rabbi. This text isn't just a collection of remedies, it's a window into how Mesopotamians blended spirituality with science, crafting incantations as potent as the herbs they prescribed. At its heart, the hymn praises Gula, the goddess of healing, but it's the practical details that baffle researchers. The text lists plants and rituals meant to cure ailments from fevers to snake bites. Some ingredients like myrrh and licorice are familiar to modern herbalists, but others referred to as the tooth of the steppe or the blood of the earth defy translation. Were these poetic nicknames for known plants or lost species we'll never identify? The incantations themselves are equally puzzling. Phrases like, "Let the evil wind depart," or "Bind the pain like a reed bundle," suggest a belief that words could amplify a remedy's power. This wasn't just superstition, it reflected a worldview where illness was often seen as divine punishment and healing required appeasing the gods. What's striking is how the hymn mirrors later medical traditions. The use of plant-based remedies echoes Greek and Egyptian practices, hinting at a shared ancient knowledge network, yet gaps in the text leave us wondering. For example, one passage mentions a seven-fold potion, but the ingredients are smudged or missing. Was this a powerful antibiotic or a symbolic ritual? Without the full recipe, we can only speculate. The Gula hymn reminds us that even in medicine, Mesopotamia thrived on enigmas. Next, we'll uncover how a Persian king's victory proclamation became entangled with Mesopotamian divine politics, and why certain lines were deliberately erased from history. Shifting our focus from healing hymns to political propaganda, we arrive at the Cyrus cylinder, a Persian artifact with a Mesopotamian twist. At first glance, this clay document celebrates Cyrus the Great's conquest of Babylon in 539 BC. But its most intriguing secrets lie in the Akkadian passages praising Marduk, Babylon's patron god. Why would a Persian ruler go out of his way to honor a defeated city's deity? The answer reveals a masterstroke of diplomacy. By framing his invasion as Marduk's divine will, claiming the god abandoned Babylon's last king for being unjust, Cyrus positioned himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator restoring order. The text's careful wording, calling him shepherd of the people and favorite of Marduk, was likely meant to pacify Babylonian priests and citizens. Yet not everyone bought the narrative. Here's where the mystery deepens. Several lines show deliberate erasures, as if someone scraped away the clay before it dried. Were these removed to hide contradictions in Cyrus's claims? One theory suggests the original text may have referenced Nabonidus, Babylon's ousted king, in a way that later editors found inconvenient. Another possibility is that the missing segments contained promises to local elites that Cyrus's successors failed to honor, prompting a cover-up. What makes these gaps so tantalizing is their timing. The erasures seem to date not from ancient looters, but from the Achaemenid Persian administration itself. This hints at internal power struggles, perhaps between Cyrus's vision of tolerance and hardliners who opposed appeasing Babylonian traditions. Without those lost lines, we're left piecing together motives from silence. As we move forward, prepare to encounter texts where the mysteries aren't in what was erased, but in what was never fully written, like the fragmented incantations against demons that even ancient scribes might have feared to complete. Now, let's step into the shadowy realm of Mesopotamian exorcisms, where the line between metaphor and literal command blurs into mystery. The UNTOLD texts, a collection of anti-demon spells, read like a surreal instruction manual for battling invisible threats. Imagine a priest chanting phrases like "bind the donkey's mouth" or "hang the serpent's tongue," words that sound more like riddles than rituals. What makes these incantations so puzzling isn't just their bizarre imagery, but the fact that their original meaning may have been lost even to later Mesopotamians. Take the command to stuff the demon's nostrils with salt. To modern eyes, it could symbolize purification. Salt was a preservative, but some scholars argue it might have been a literal step in a physical ritual, perhaps involving effigies. The texts never clarify, leaving us to wonder, were these metaphors meant to confuse demons, or did they encode practical steps now forgotten? Even stranger are the recurring references to animals. One spell demands the exorcist tie the feet of the raven, while another speaks of the dog that enters no house. Ravens and dogs had symbolic ties to the underworld in Mesopotamian lore, but why single out these creatures? Some theories suggest the spells targeted specific demonic forms, while others propose the animals were stand-ins for human ailments, like using raven to represent feverish delirium. The most haunting gap in these texts is their abrupt endings. Several spells trail off mid-sentence, as if scribes feared writing the final words. Were these rituals left incomplete to avoid invoking the very evils they sought to banish? Or did the missing lines contain secrets too dangerous to record? Unlike the Cyrus Cylinders' political erasures, these gaps feel intentional, as if silence itself was part of the magic. As we turn next to the fragmented tale of Etana's celestial journey, keep in mind how Mesopotamians used ambiguity as a shield, and perhaps a weapon against forces they could name but never fully control. Now, let's soar into the skies with one of Mesopotamia's most enigmatic tales, the myth of Etana. This fragmented story follows a king's extraordinary journey to heaven on the back of an eagle, a quest filled with cryptic dialogue and sudden breaks that leave scholars piecing together its meaning like an ancient puzzle. The story begins with Etana, a ruler desperate for an heir who strikes a deal with an eagle. But here's where things get murky. Their conversations etched onto broken tablets cut off mid-sentence. One moment, the eagle warns Etana not to look down during their ascent. The next, the text jumps to Etana's terrified cries as the earth shrinks beneath him. What happened in between? Was there a betrayal, a divine test, or simply a scribe's error? The gaps taunt us with lost wisdom. Some believe the myth carried a moral warning, perhaps about ambition. Etana's flight could symbolize the dangers of reaching too high, literally and politically. After all, Mesopotamian kings were seen as divinely chosen, yet here's one who nearly falls from grace, literally clinging to an eagle. Others argue it's a political allegory. The eagle, often linked to royalty, might represent a rival or ally, and their fractured dialogue hints at unstable alliances. Then there's the ending or lack of one. Later versions suggest Etana found a magical plant of birth, securing his lineage, but the original tablets, they end abruptly, as if the scribe left the moral deliberately open. Was Etana rewarded for his faith or punished for his pride? The silence leaves room for both interpretations, a reminder that some ancient stories were meant to provoke debate, not deliver easy answers. As we move next to the Babylonian map of the world, keep in mind how myths like Etana's weren't just stories. They were mirrors held up to human fears and aspirations, cracked but still reflecting truths across millennia. Shifting our gaze from the skies to the earth, and beyond, we encounter the Babylonian map of the world, a clay tablet that's equal parts geography and mystery. This ancient diagram, etched around 2,600 years ago, isn't just a map. It's a window into how the Babylonians saw their universe, blending the tangible with the unimaginable. At its center lies Babylon, surrounded by a circular river labeled the Bitter Water. Beyond that, triangular regions mark distant lands like Assyria, and Elam, places the Babylonians knew existed. But then comes the enigma. The outermost rings bear cryptic labels, beyond the sun and where the stars are not seen. These phrases ignite debate. Were the Babylonians mapping cosmic realms, suggesting they believed in layers of existence past our own? Or were these poetic flourishes a way to express the limits of human knowledge? Some scholars argue this was early cosmology. The rings might represent celestial spheres, echoing later Greek ideas of concentric heavens. Others counter that it's pure mythology, a symbolic edge of the world where gods or chaos dwelled. The map's purpose deepens the puzzle. Found in a scribe's house, it might have been a teaching tool, a ritual object, or even a speculative exercise. Unlike modern maps, it wasn't meant for navigation. It was a statement: this is where we stand, and here be mysteries. What's striking is how the map mirrors Mesopotamian texts. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a tunnel where the sun vanishes, and the Enuma Anu speaks of primordial waters beyond creation. The map's bitter water could be that same chaotic void, yet unlike those stories, the map offers no resolution. It simply presents the unknown as fact, inviting us to wonder, did the Babylonians believe these outer rings were real places, or were they acknowledging the limits of their world? As we prepare to unravel the violent prophecies of the era epic, remember this: the Babylonian map doesn't just chart space, it captures a mindset where geography and myth weren't separate, but intertwined. A reminder that every civilization draws borders not just on land, but in the imagination. Now, let's step into the shadows of Mesopotamian literature with the era epic, a text that pulses with divine rage and ominous warnings. This ancient poem, carved into clay tablets over 3,000 years ago, follows the war god Era as he unleashes chaos upon the world, his speeches dripping with violence and foreboding. What makes this epic so chilling isn't just its bloodshed, it's the way Era's words seem to echo beyond myth, hinting at real fears of societal unraveling. At the heart of the epic lies a haunting refrain: the city is a carcass. This phrase, repeated like a grim drumbeat, paints a picture of urban decay, streets emptied, temples crumbling, and silence where life once thrived. Some scholars argue this isn't just poetic flair. They see it as a coded critique, a warning from scribes about the fragility of civilization. Could the era epic have been a veiled commentary on political instability, or even environmental crises like drought or famine? The text's timing adds weight to this theory. It emerged during periods of upheaval in Babylon when empires teetered and cities fell. Yet Era isn't just a destroyer, he's a manipulator. In one unsettling passage, he tricks even the gods into aiding his rampage, whispering that order itself is an illusion. This twist fuels debate. Was the epic meant to scare people into obedience, a divine cautionary tale? Or did it reflect genuine anxiety, a society grappling with its own vulnerability? the ambiguity is deliberate. Unlike clearer moral texts, the era epic offers no easy lessons. It lingers in the gray zone between myth and metaphor, leaving us to wonder, were the Babylonians seeing their own future in era's wrath? As we move forward, keep this in mind. The era epic doesn't just recount destruction, it mirrors the human habit of framing real fears through divine drama. And in its eerie repetition, we hear an ancient echo. Civilizations rise, but they can also rot. Now, let's shift our focus from divine wrath to the quieter, yet equally mysterious world of ritual purification with the Sherpu incantations. These ancient Mesopotamian texts were more than just prayers. They were intricate ceremonies designed to cleanse individuals of unseen sins and misfortunes. What makes them so fascinating is their clever use of symbolism, where everyday objects like burning reeds or broken pottery stood in for human guilt. Imagine holding a bundle of reeds as they crackled in the fire, each flame consuming not just the plant but the weight of your mistakes. The Sherpu texts never outright name the sins they're meant to erase. Instead, they dance around them with metaphors, leaving historians to wonder, was this secrecy a form of protection? Perhaps naming certain wrongdoings aloud was seen as too dangerous, risking further divine anger. Or maybe it reflected a belief that some sins were too complex to put into words, better expressed through rituals than direct confession. This ambiguity adds layers to our understanding of Mesopotamian spirituality, where even purification required a kind of poetic discretion. One striking example is the recurring motif of the knot that must be untied. Scholars debate whether this referred to literal knots in ceremonial cords or symbolic entanglements of fate. Either way, the act of untying became a powerful metaphor for release from guilt. The rituals didn't just cleanse, they transformed abstract fears into tangible actions, giving people a way to physically interact with their own redemption. Yet the biggest puzzle remains. Why did these texts avoid specifics? Some argue it was a way to make the incantations universal, applicable to any sin without needing endless variations. Others suspect darker reasons, that certain transgressions were considered too shameful or taboo to acknowledge directly. Whatever the truth, the Sherpu incantations remind us that even in ancient times, people grappled with the weight of wrongdoing, seeking solace in flames and whispered words. As we move forward, consider how these rituals blur the line between the material and the spiritual. In a world where guilt could be burned away like reeds, redemption wasn't just an idea, it was something you could hold in your hand. From the solemn rituals of purification, we now step into a world of biting wit and existential questioning with the dialogue of pessimism. This Mesopotamian text stands out like a darkly humorous outlier among its more serious counterparts, filled with exchanges that sound like they belong in a modern absurdist play. Picture a conversation where every hopeful suggestion is met with cynical retorts, like a servant proposing to build a house, only for his master to snap back, "Why build a house?" To destroy it. At first glance, these dialogues seem like pure nihilism, rejecting any meaning in human effort, but look closer and you'll catch glimmers of satire. Could this have been an ancient critique of societal norms, mocking the endless cycles of labor and futility? Some scholars argue it's a clever jab at the elite, exposing how even their grandest ambitions lead nowhere. Others see it as a genuine expression of despair, a rare window into Mesopotamian doubts about life's purpose. The text's ambiguity is its brilliance. One moment, it reads like a comedian's routine, exaggerating life's contradictions for laughs. The next, it feels like a weary sigh, questioning whether any action truly matters. This duality makes it timeless. Were Mesopotamians laughing at themselves, or were they genuinely disillusioned? The answer might lie in between, revealing a culture capable of both deep reflection and sharp humor. What's undeniable is how modern it feels. Strip away the ancient language, and you're left with questions that still haunt us today. Is hard work just a setup for disappointment? Does love inevitably lead to loss? The dialogue of pessimism doesn't offer answers. It holds up a mirror, forcing us to confront the absurdity we often ignore. As we move forward, keep this tension in mind, because whether it's satire or nihilism, this text proves that ancient minds wrestled with the same existential knots we do, just with a little more poetic flair. Now, shifting our focus from existential musings to divine retribution, we arrive at the Widener Chronicle, a text that reads like an ancient Mesopotamian version of cosmic karma. This inscription weaves a stark narrative where every misfortune, from locust swarms to military defeats, is framed as divine punishment for a king's negligence. Picture this: a ruler forgets to make offerings to the gods, and suddenly his kingdom is overrun by pests. It's a blunt cause and effect logic that leaves no room for coincidence. But here's where it gets intriguing. While the Chronicle presents these events as unbreakable divine law, historians have found discrepancies when comparing its claims to actual records. For instance, some kings accused of neglecting temples in the text were, in reality, devout patrons of religious sites. So why the contradiction? Scholars suggest the Widener Chronicle might have been political propaganda, a way to justify the rise of new rulers by painting their predecessors as morally bankrupt. It's a reminder that even in antiquity, history was often written by the victors, with the gods serving as convenient scapegoats. The Chronicle's theology also raises questions about how Mesopotamians viewed their gods. Unlike modern concepts of benevolent deities, these divine beings were portrayed as easily offended landlords, quick to unleash chaos over unpaid rent, metaphorically speaking. Yet this harsh worldview had a purpose. It reinforced social order. If people believed negligence invited disaster, they'd be more likely to uphold rituals and obey rulers. What's fascinating is how this ancient text mirrors a timeless human tendency to seek patterns in chaos, to blame misfortune on moral failings. Today, we might call it superstition, but back then it was divine justice. The Widener Chronicle doesn't just record history, it shapes it, proving that even 4,000 years ago, storytelling was a tool of power. As we peel back these layers, keep in mind the delicate dance between myth and reality. Because sometimes the most cryptic inscriptions aren't just about the past, they're about who gets to control the narrative. Now, let's turn our attention to one of Mesopotamia's most enigmatic rulers, King Nabonidus, and the cryptic clues left behind in his so-called cylinder. This artifact doesn't just record his achievements, it drops a tantalizing hint about his sudden, decade-long disappearance from Babylon. Imagine a king vanishing from his capital for 10 years, leaving historians scrambling for answers. The cylinder offers no clear explanation, only vague references to Nabonidus being called away by the moon god Sin. So what really happened? Theories abound. Some scholars argue Nabonidus suffered from a debilitating illness, possibly a form of mental or physical affliction that forced him into seclusion. Others suggest his absence was a religious retreat, an extreme act of devotion to Sin, whom he worshipped fervently, even at the expense of Babylon's traditional god Marduk. This theory gains traction from archaeological evidence showing Nabonidus spent years in the Arabian oasis of Tama, possibly building temples to Sin. But here's where it gets even stranger. Later Babylonian texts paint Nabonidus as an eccentric, even a heretic, blaming his absence for the empire's decline. Was this a smear campaign by his political enemies? Quite possibly. The cylinder itself, written upon his return, seems like a desperate attempt to justify his rule, emphasizing his piety and divine favor. Yet the mystery lingers. Why would a king abandon his throne for a decade? Was it faith, folly, or something darker? The Nabonidus cylinder doesn't just hide answers, it embodies the fragile nature of power in ancient Mesopotamia. One ruler's spiritual quest becomes another's downfall, and the line between devotion and delusion blurs. As we piece together these fragments, remember, sometimes the most revealing inscriptions are the ones that raise more questions than they answer. Now, as we reach the final inscription in our journey through Mesopotamia's cryptic messages, we encounter one of the most puzzling endings of all, the advice of Utnapishtim, the immortal flood survivor from the Epic of Gilgamesh. After Gilgamesh's exhausting quest for eternal life, he finally meets Utnapishtim, the man who outsmarted death itself. But what Utnapishtim tells him is anything but straightforward. Instead of a clear secret to immortality, Gilgamesh receives a series of riddles. Utnapishtim speaks of a plant at the bottom of the sea that restores youth only for it to be stolen by a serpent. He describes sleep as a little death, warning Gilgamesh that even he cannot escape it. And then, abruptly, the story ends. No grand revelation, no satisfying answer, just silence. Why such an ambiguous conclusion? Some scholars believe it's a deliberate choice, reflecting the Mesopotamian view that immortality isn't for humans to grasp. The plant's loss symbolizes the inevitability of death, no matter how hard one fights against it. Others argue the abrupt ending mirrors life itself, unpredictable, unresolved, and full of unanswered questions. What makes Utnapishtim's instructions so haunting is their realism. Unlike other myths that promise divine rewards, this one leaves Gilgamesh and us with a sobering truth: some mysteries have no solutions. And perhaps that's the real lesson hidden in these ancient words. After all, isn't the search for meaning just as important as finding it? With that, we've explored all 25 of Mesopotamia's most cryptic inscriptions, each one a fragment of a civilization that still speaks to us across millennia. But the story doesn't end here. Next, we'll step behind the scenes to uncover how these ancient puzzles were even decoded in the first place. Now, let's pull back the curtain and uncover the fascinating and often messy process of decoding these ancient inscriptions. Imagine staring at a cracked clay tablet covered in symbols no one has read for thousands of years. Where do you even begin? For early scholars, it was like solving a puzzle with half the pieces missing. They relied on broken dictionaries left by the Mesopotamians themselves, clay tablets listing Sumerian and Akkadian words side by side, but these weren't perfect. Some entries were damaged, others mistranslated by ancient scribes. One famous mix-up turned a harmless agricultural term into a demon of the barley, sparking myths that lingered for decades. Then came the Rosetta Stone moment, the Behistun inscription. Carved into a cliff in Iran, it repeated the same text in 3 languages, including Old Persian, which scholars already understood. This became the key to cracking cuneiform, but even with a guide, progress was slow. A single symbol could have multiple meanings depending on context. The word for life might also mean rib, thanks to a pun the Mesopotamians loved. Modern technology has revolutionized the work. Artificial intelligence now scans thousands of tablets, spotting patterns humans might miss. Yet luck still plays a role. A rainstorm might wash away dirt, revealing a crucial line. A museum intern might stumble on a forgotten fragment that fills a gap in a royal hymn. And mistakes, they've led to some wild detours. In the early 1900s, a misread line about bright stars was thought to describe advanced astronomy until someone realized it was just a poetic way to say, "The gods are watching." Another translation error turned a king's grocery list into a supposed ritual for summoning storms. Decoding these inscriptions isn't just about dictionaries or algorithms. It's a dance between patience, intuition, and sometimes sheer serendipity. And as we'll see next, even with all our tools, some lines still defy understanding, leaving us with mysteries that might never be solved. Now, let's turn our attention to the inscriptions that still keep scholars up at night, those stubborn lines that refuse to give up their secrets. Despite centuries of study, some phrases remain locked away, teasing us with glimpses of meaning we can't quite grasp. Take the Ur-Nammu prophecy, for example. This text describes a future king who will rise like a storm and restore order. but the next line is a jumble of symbols that no one can agree on. Some think it predicts a great flood, while others argue it's a metaphor for political upheaval. The truth, it's still anyone's guess. Then there's the Etana myth, where the hero soars into the sky on an eagle's back. Midway through their flight, the tablet cracks, leaving a gap right as the eagle gives Etana a cryptic warning. Translators have tried filling the blank with everything from "beware the sun's anger" to "trust not the wind's whispers," but the original message is lost to time. And don't forget the Sherpu incantations. These rituals describe sins that must be burned away, but the text never names the sins directly. Instead, it uses riddles like "the thing that walks at midnight" or "the voice that divides brothers." Were these crimes, curses, or something else entirely? Even the best linguists are stumped. Here's where you come in. What do you think these mysterious lines could mean? Drop your theories in the comments. Maybe you'll spot something the experts missed. After all, the next big breakthrough could come from anywhere, even from you. Up next, we'll wrap up our journey through Mesopotamia's cryptic messages, but one thing's certain: these ancient words still have stories left to tell. As we bring our journey through Mesopotamia's cryptic inscriptions to a close, one thing becomes undeniably clear: these ancient texts are a mesmerizing blend of the practical and the profoundly mysterious. From celestial omens etched into clay to poetic curses whispered across millennia, each inscription offers a window into a civilization that balanced daily life with the divine, the logical with the enigmatic. Think about it, the same people who meticulously recorded laws and trade agreements also penned riddles about flying eagles and unnameable sins. They measured fields with mathematical precision, yet left gaps in their stories that still taunt us today. It's this duality that makes Mesopotamia so endlessly fascinating a culture, as grounded as it was mystical. So here's a question to leave you with. If you could unravel the secrets of just one of these inscriptions, which would it be? Would you chase the missing lines of the Etana myth, decode the Sherpu incantations' hidden sins, or perhaps solve the Uruk prophecies' stormy riddle? The choice is yours, and who knows, maybe your curiosity will spark the next big discovery. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into history's unsolved puzzles, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are plenty more ancient mysteries waiting to be uncovered, and we'd love for you to join us as we explore them. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and keep digging into the past. The answers are out there somewhere.